Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to week number 75 of the Indigenous Global Unity Summit event that we are doing weekly on these Thursday mornings at 11 o'clock in Eastern Time, Toronto. So I do like to start all of these sessions with the land acknowledgement. So we acknowledge those who came before us on this land. We begin today by acknowledging that we walk upon the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples, and we recognize their history, spirituality, culture, and stewardship of the land. We're grateful to all Indigenous groups for their commitment to protect the land and its resources, and we are committed to reconciliation, partnership, and enhanced understanding. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on here in the Greater Toronto area is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of Credit, the Wendat, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe peoples, and is now home to many diverse peoples. We'd also like to acknowledge the land we're on here is at the meeting place of two treaties, the lands of the Mississaugas of Credit and those of the First Nations of the Williams Treaty. We thank them and other Indigenous people for sharing this land with us. We also acknowledge and recognize all of the world's Indigenous peoples as stewards of Mother Earth. So I do like to go through and say Sawubona as well, which means I see you, I see myself in you, I see your hopes, your dreams, and your struggles. I see your ancestors as well, because interconnectedness does not end with two people greeting each other. It extends to include the ancestors. All beings and Mother Nature are interconnected. There is no sense of being separate. I see myself in all beings, and therefore, if I harm other beings or Mother Nature, it translates into harming myself. So I do also like to go through the events that are coming up. Today is Thursday, November 10th, 2022, again, week 75 of our IGU Summit series. Today is actually World Science Day for Peace and Development. This is a celebration of that highlights the importance role science plays in society and seeks to involve the wider public in discussions on current science issues. UNESCO declared November 10th as World Science Day for Peace and Development in 2001. It was celebrated every 10th of November with World Science Day for Peace and Development highlighting the important role of science in society and the need to engage the wider public in debates on emerging scientific issues. It also underlies the importance and relevance of science in our daily lives. By linking science more closely with society, World Science Day for Peace and Development aims to ensure that citizens are kept informed of developments in science. It also underscores the role scientists play in broadening our understanding of the remarkable, fragile planet we call home, in making our societies more sustainable. Again, I am giving some additional information in the chat for those on the call. So this is also International Week of Science and Peace, which the International Week of Science and Peace was first observed in 1986 as part of the observance of the International Year of Peace. In recognition of the value of the annual observance, the General Assembly of the UN adopted the resolution in 1988 and proclaims the International Week of Science and Peace to take place each year during the week in which 11th November falls. We celebrate the International Week of Science for Science and Peace in consideration that the origins of drawdown marking and the CSF program come from our relationship to the organization Science for Peace through our working group, POSWA, Community Sustainability Working Group, which again, I am putting a reference into the chat. So in less than a week is the International Day for Tolerance on Wednesday, November 16th, 2022. The International Day for Tolerance is an annual observance declared by UNESCO in 1995 to generate public awareness of the dangers of intolerance. It's observed on the 16th of November. In 1996, the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution proclaiming the 16th of November as International Day for Tolerance. The action followed the adoption of the Declaration of Principles on Tolerance by UNESCO's member states. Tolerance is respect, acceptance, and appreciation of the rich diversity of the world's cultures, and our forms of expression and kind and ways of being human. Again, there is this information in the chat. I am also providing a little bit of the history of the International Day of Tolerance. I have wanted to mention as well, I've also been invited to attend the Scholastic Foundation Asian Youth Leaders Summit and Awards 2022, the annual signature event of the Asian Youth Leaders Summit and Awards. Brings together youth from all around the world who want to create and implement an action plan on various SDGs and domains in their own region. The Scholastic Foundation sees youth as agents for change and development. The Scholastic Foundation is based in Nepal and is a nonprofit organization with the ambition to collectively develop society. It was founded in 2016 as a team of like-minded youths determined for youth mobilization on social welfare activities, aiming to reform the academic field. Their team has been involved in many academic activities all over Nepal. They strive toward a vision to establish and facilitate exceptional educational spaces all over the country. They believe in focusing on the credibility of the knowledge that is imparted in school and to provide excellent quality of personal development to students in a sustainable way as their primary aim. So if those who would like to potentially attend this with our team at UnityNet, put in your request to attend in the chat for the Summit and Awards, where that organization is accepting these applications up until tomorrow, November 11th, 2022. I'd also like to ask all UnityNet country chapter leaders, and I have asked this through our groups, and as well any other relevant organizations with an interest in attending to apply to represent their country and their organization at this Global Youth Leaders Summit that takes place in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, at the Kuala Lumpur Convention Center from December 19th to 21st, 2022. Again, in the chat.
Just to remind them, Lloyd, in about 2 minutes, there'll be 45 minutes left for the presentation.
Okay. So I'm just putting a little bit of additional information into the chat. I do want to remind everybody, last month on Sunday, October 16th, was World Food Day. We completed our first UnityNet Youth Peace Week, actually 2 weeks, but we want to do this every year from Global Cooperation Day, October 4th, until World Food Day, October 16th. We intend to do these as days when we host our UnityNet Global Smart Youth Forum hybrid in-person and virtual events, with Youth Peace Week also including World Teachers Day, Migratory Bird Day, World Mental Health Day, International Day of the Girl Child, International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction, and the International Day for Rural Women. So at this point, one other important event that I do want to mention as well is the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction, which was during Youth Peace Week, October 13th, where I did the presentation about Science for Peace Causeway Climate Smart Food Program, which lies at the heart of the UnityNet Regenerative Climate Smart Networks and the various enterprise ecosystems that we're building within UnityNet and the Global Partnership for Regenerative Development. It's by no means the only regenerative solutions we're promoting as we move forward toward creating this localized, productive, compassionate, collaborative, regenerative economy.
Thank you, Lloyd. It's the time for the presentation.
Okay, let's move forward. Thank you. So, Sarah, we will pass it on to you to do your presentation.
Okay, thanks so much. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with Unity Network. Thank you for the people in attending, and thank you, Andrew, with AHIABGA-TV for everything that you plan to do with this recording. My name is Sarah Gabrielle Barron. I am in the race for leader of the Green Party of Canada, but this event is not about that. It's not about politics. This event and my invitation from Lloyd and Andrew is about my work over the past 2.5 years to learn everything I can about the nuclear industry in Canada. And that has expanded into an awareness of the nuclear industry around the world. So without further ado, I will do a little bit of background, and then I have some sharings of Indigenous perspectives, stuff that's readily available on the internet. I have personal connection with all the people of the recordings that I'm going to show you, and this has serious repercussions for smaller and middle nations around the planet, because this 4th generation of nuclear is going to be marketed to you, and you need to know the truth about what's really going on with the entire uranium fuel chain. So without further ado, I will share my screen. So, can everyone see my screen? Lloyd, can you still see my screen?
Yes,
A second.
Okay, super. So this presentation is called Energy Paradigms. And so I am very, very lucky that over the course of most of my adult life, I've been able to live in a place called Manitoulin Island, which is at the top of those beautiful Great Lakes in Canada. And the Indigenous communities that are there from the Anishinaabe Nation, which is comprised of the Three Fires Confederacy of Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi peoples, and includes the Mississauga Nation. And one of the teachings that they freely give for us to share is the idea that in our planning, we should not just look 5 years or 10 years ahead, but we should look 7 generations ahead. And that has direct reference to the nuclear industry, because these wastes last for multiple times of more than 7 generations into the future. So when we talk about nuclear energy, we need to think about those radioactive legacies. So here is a map of the world. I'm going to switch it to terrain view because it's prettier. All right, so here's Canada and the United States. We call it Turtle Island because if you kind of look at it in that way, you can see it does look like a turtle. Indigenous nations have brought us that teaching. And the nuclear legacy in Canada begins in Saskatchewan. This is the largest lake in Saskatchewan. It's called Lake Athabasca. And you can see up at the top there, a place called Uranium City and El Dorado. El Dorado was the original company from the United States that started mining uranium here. This uranium was used in the first nuclear tests, and it was used in Fat Boy and Little Man, the nuclear bombs that exploded at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and launched us into the age of nuclear weapons that dominates geopolitical awareness around the world today. So this lake is permanently contaminated. Permanently, this will last for hundreds of thousands of years. This radioactive legacy, you should not eat the fish in this lake, the largest lake in Saskatchewan. Another permanent legacy waste site for mining in Canada is where I live, here at the top of the Great Lakes in Ontario. So these are our Great Lakes. And this is the largest freshwater island in the world, Manitoulin Island. That's where I've spent the past 22 years of my life. I should say that I am non-Indigenous. I am 5th generation Canadian with roots in Britain, Scotland, Ireland, and Ukraine. And up here in a place called Elliott Lake is where there is dreadful uranium mining legacy. There are 10 tailings lakes in this area that are held back by 64 dams that are leaching into the Serpent River watershed, river area, and are the largest source of radioactive waste to the Great Lakes system. And these 64 dams on these 10 tailing lakes are magically supposed to last for millennia, thousands of years. There are other places. So Canada, I do believe, is the 2nd largest source of uranium in the world. And there are other places. The Navajo Nation is in this area, and they also have terrible legacy wastes from uranium mining. There's a lot of great information on the internet and documentaries about that. The largest source of uranium in the world comes from Kazakhstan, which is a satellite province dominated by Putin's Russia. They also have terrible legacies of nuclear test bombing. And another legacy legacy communities with legacy wastes is in Australia. So I would strongly caution any nation that is being where uranium might be found. If prospectors come knocking on your doors, hoping to mine uranium, close the door as quickly as possible. So I will bring it back to my presentation and talking about Indigenous perspectives. So before I go too much more about nuclear, just want to bring it back to the positive that there are technologies that we all know that are ready now that can do everything we need them to do to answer the climate crisis. We've had solar technology, wind technology, geothermal technology, tidal technology, and there is cool science available around organisms that can be grown that produce electricity. And in terms of what we do with that electricity, we need to focus on systems that are ready for the climate change crisis. We need to create infrastructures now that future generations will use to survive and thrive in the era of climate change, because their infrastructures will be, we can no longer rely on these massive industrial energy systems. We have to go small scale. We need to be resilient. And that looks like smart grids, technologies that are more plastic around where our energy comes from and what we do with it in terms of more localized energy grids. There's amazing technology around batteries. Electric vehicles are now bringing in bidirectional charging. So yes, you can put electricity into the battery in your car, but then in times when you need a charge, even to your house or into your community, you can have the energy come out of the battery in your car. Hydrogravity batteries, it's got different names, but essentially that technology is putting, when you have an excess of energy, say from your solar system or your wind system or your tidal system, you can pump water up. We're talking about using mines, we're talking about, in Canada, we have a lot of small lake systems. So you pump water into a reservoir above, and then you can just use gravity to turn the turbine to generate electricity in times when you need electricity. So they are considered batteries. And then this technology around ground storage is really an unsung, really easy technology that you can store, you can capture heat from the sun, store it in caverns underground for months at a time. And then Canada is a very cold country. You can harvest that stored heat to heat your homes. So there's a really cool experiment that's more than a decade old now called Drake's Landing in Alberta, where they use this technology to power 90% of the homes in the winter, not to power them, but to heat them And that, I believe that technology has been suppressed. So I'm going to start off with some presentations from Indigenous people that I know. And one of them is a good friend. Her name is Jawan Akwad Ikwe, which in English means South Cloud Woman. And her name is also Joan Morningstar. And Joan and I last year did a intervention to the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. And we really need to watch these watchdog organizations. The Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission is supposed to keep us safe. And yet Health Canada has no jurisdiction over them. And so without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to this presentation by Joan. And we're going to go to minute 1:29:22. Oops, sorry. So this is the lead of the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. And here we go, Lloyd. I think I'm having my technical difficulties. You can't hear that, can you?
Yeah, I was going to ask you, did you check the little box that said share audio when you shared your screen?
No, I did not.
Yeah, so you'll maybe have to restart, just share your screen again, and there's a little checkbox at the bottom that will allow you to share the sound.
Start recording or casting with Zoom. No, unfortunately. Oh, share audio on.
Yes.
Okay, wow, learn something new every day. All right, off we go. So that's here we go. You still can't hear that, can you?
No, we can't.
There we go.
Is that the presentation that you shared with Lloyd or not?
Can you hear her now?
Not yet.
No.
Did you want me to try to share my end?
If you have it, yes.
I do have the presentation on my desktop.
Sorry about that, folks.
Video.
While we're waiting for Lloyd to work that up, does anybody want to unmute and ask me any questions about what I've been going on so far?
So what slide was that with the link video?
It's the third slide, and it's the first link. It's right over Joan's name.
Okay.
Sarah, where are you living right now?
I am in Ottawa for the race for the Green Party of Canada, and that is Algonquin unceded territory, which is also related to the Anishinaabe Nation. So Odawa is actually named for one of those nations that makes up the Anishinaabe Nation.
Okay, all right. I'm in Toronto. I'm based in Toronto,
That's
Canada.
So what minute were you going to?
It says right beside her name. I think it's minute 1:29. She Joan had cancer, quite possibly due to a fallout scenario from Blind River. So before we start, I should say that Joan lives close to that community I was showing you, Elliott Lake. And Cameco, El Dorado was the original mining company. Now it's called Cameco. And they have one of the world's largest uranium refineries and incinerators. They burn some nuclear garbage there. And Joan's community is just 1.5 kilometers from that refinery.
Okay, let me see if this will work. So I'm at 1:28:49. So
Perfect.
that should be good. We'll play.
For accommodating our previous presenter. I very much appreciate you appearing in front of us today. Thank you.
Merci, madame.
Hey, our next presentation is by Ms. Joan Morningstar and Ms. Sarah Gabrielle Baron, as outlined in CMDs 21-H9.43 and 21-H9.43A. I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you. I'm Joan Morningstar, and I'm from Mississauga First Nation. You have to excuse my language because I had cancer and it attacked all my fine and gross motor skills along with my talking and walking. So I would like.
Next slide.
In the late summer of, in the late summer of early 80s, I was hired to clean trailers used for the buck houses for the men at El Dorado site. I was the only person from Mississauga First Nation working there. I was laid off and I didn't know why until I was called back to work 2 weeks later. During that week, when I was cleaning the last room, when I heard music, I checked all the rooms to see if a radio was on. There was no radio on. I went back to the room where I was cleaning. I sat on the bed and started to listen to the music. First, I could hear faint drumming, then faint voices of men, women, children wailing. The drumming and voices became louder. The wailing and drumming swirled above me and filled the room. Their grief and sorrow brought tears to my eyes. That evening, I went to talk to my mother-in-law. I told her what I experienced. She stated that they disturbed something there. She said they probably disturbed a burial ground. She instructed me to go back to work and ask around. At work the next day at lunch, I sat down with my friend and asked her again what happened when they laid me off. She looked all around to make sure there was no one near us. She looked at me and looked down. She said, "We were told not to tell you. The boss said we would get fired if we said anything to you." She looked at me and said in a quiet voice, "They dug up a burial ground." My friend said they had archaeologists in and a big spotlight hooked up at the excavation area 24/7. She said the helicopters came in to take away the burial remains out the direction of the dig. I thanked her. That evening, I sat with my mother-in-law and told my mother-in-law of the burial ground. They dug up and took our people and their sacred items, what you call artifacts, out. My mother-in-law gave me instructions to make an offering of food and tobacco. She said to go to the excavation site and make the offerings and talk to them. That weekend, my husband and I went by Mississauga River on the canoe. We parked the canoe where the burial ground was. We climbed the bank. We walked to the tree line and entered. Once in there, we could see the depressions around each rectangle. I stood at some of them of the excavation digs and thanked my people for reaching out to me. When it got too much for me to comprehend, I sat down by a tree and started to cry. These archaeologists don't know the sacredness of what they stole from us. Again, I could hear the drums and the wailing of men, women, and children. Once we were done, I returned to talk to my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law told me to find our people and bring them and their sacred items home. It has been a long journey of searching for my people. My mother-in-law is 98 years old now. I hope that I can fulfill her wishes and bring our people home.
Thanks so much,
My
Lloyd. I think you can
final
probably pause it
thought
there. I hate to cut
my
Joan off,
question
but
to
so can you guys see me now?
Not yet.
Yes.
It's closing
Yeah.
the screen. Okay.
Okay, so so that is a very moving story of how Indigenous peoples are different from the European mindset. Indigenous peoples are so brave to share their spiritual stories and their emotions. And a European mindset doesn't recognize spiritual elements and doesn't recognize emotional elements in decision-making processes. And that's a real danger, especially when it comes to land use. In that intervention, I helped Joan invoke the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which Canada has ratified, and which clearly states that Indigenous elders like Joan have the right to call for the repatriation of disturbed and stolen sacred artifacts and remains. And she was completely ignored by the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission during that intervention. She has been completely ignored by her member of parliament that we spoke with about a month later. And she's still in the search for bringing those remains and sacred artifacts home. Are there any questions right now before we keep going? Okay, Lloyd, I'm just gonna share my screen again real quick so that people, well, you know what, Lloyd, why don't you just go ahead to the next link and the next section. I believe it was Dr. Gordon Edwards.
Just give me 1 second to go back to the presentation.
So I'll just give Dr. Gordon Edwards a quick introduction. Dr. Gordon Edwards is a Canadian hero. He's a professor. He has spent his entire life bringing Canadians the truth about the nuclear industry. He ran back in the early 70s against Pierre Elliott Trudeau just to try to bring information to Canadians about what was really going on. In the 70s, Canadian technology and materials were freely given to middle and developing nations around the world. And India attained the nuclear bomb, and it was the start of a new nuclear arms race of middle powers around the world. And at that time, everyone looked to Canada and rightfully blamed Canada. We were responsible for that. And it was a technology called reprocessing, which is really, really dangerous. And at the time, Pierre Elliott Trudeau and Jimmy Carter, the American president, placed a moratorium on reprocessing technology. So in the uranium fuel chain, plutonium does not exist in our universe anywhere except on planet Earth. Humans created plutonium. When we bust apart the uranium atom, we get a lot of different, they're called radionuclides. And one of them is plutonium, and it is only created through reprocessing. So go ahead, Lloyd. Let's hear directly at that minute that's on the presentation. Let's hear directly from Dr. Gordon Edwards.
Okay, I will share my screen again. Hold on just 1 second.
His organization is called the CCNR, Concerned Canadians for Nuclear Responsibility. So you can just go to ccnr.org. And this presentation is by Dr. Susan O'Donnell with her guests, one of whom is also Lorraine Reckmans, who was the first Indigenous president of a Canadian party, the Green Party of Canada, and is from Elliott Lake, that community that I was telling you about. And she's the one who introduced me to Joan Morningstar.
Okay, I'll play right now. Oh, wait, I'm not sure if I share my sound. Okay,
Yep, we
stop.
can hear you.
Try one more time. You can hear me, then I'll hear the video.
Thanks for your patience, everyone.
Okay. starting again.
So the ravenresearch.org is a really great organization that's doing work.
Welcome, everyone.
If you
I'm
can
Susan
fast forward to the
O'Donnell. I'm the
time that's
lead
on the
investigator
presentation
of the
there,
Raven
Lloyd.
Project, which stands for Rural Action and Voices for the Environment.
Sorry, I didn't hear that. It was too.
Yeah, so there's a time on my presentation that you want to fast forward this to.
So when do you want that?
You can fast forward it to minute 16:09, and then we're going to give it a quick pause and go to minute 22.
Okay, that's almost 16.
life for half of those to disintegrate. And so it goes on and on and on. After 10 half-lives, you've reduced the amount of radioactive substance by approximately a factor of 1,000. Now, radioactivity is dangerous, and the people who mine uranium aren't really concerned so much about the dangers. That's just a nuisance to them. What they want to get is the uranium, to use it either as a fuel or as an explosive. But the people who are the innocent bystanders, they have to be concerned about the health effects of radioactivity. Chronic exposure increases the incidence of cancer, leukemia, genetic damage, also strokes, heart attacks, and other blood diseases such as anemia that Marie Curie died of and her daughter Irene, and even of low intelligence in young children who have been exposed in the womb. But there is a latency period. The onset of disease may occur years or decades after exposure. It's very similar to cigarette smoking. You don't see people smoke a cigarette and then kill. The same thing happens with radiation. So the effects are many years later, and consequently are subtle. They're not easily detected unless you go looking for them very carefully.
So
you can't
can
see radioactivity, but if you put it in a special device called a cloud chamber, you can actually see the tracks of these particles that are being given off all the time. So it's constantly emitting this invisible, you can't taste it, you can't see it, you can't smell it. There's nothing you can do except experience the ill effects of it. And unless you have special equipment, you won't even know that radioactivity exists because it just looks like normal inert material, but it's not.
So if you don't mind pausing it there, Lloyd. So a common refrain from the trillion-dollar nuclear industry is that it is non-emitting. And right there, Dr. Gordon Edwards is proving to us that it most certainly is emitting. It emits radioactivity. And when those radionuclide particles get into our bodies, it emits for our entire lifetime. And that's what causes cancer. However, like he was saying, it's latent. So if you're exposed, you might not get cancer until 40 years later. If you don't mind fast forwarding to minute 22, we'll just hear a little bit more from Dr. Gordon Edwards.
Okay, just give me a second here.
Kill 250 billion more people with the polonium. By the way, these deadly radionuclides, radium, radon, and polonium, are all alpha emitters, and so are uranium and plutonium. Alpha emitters don't have much penetrating paper. They won't go through, they don't have much penetrating power. Alpha particles won't go through a sheet of paper, but they do enormous harm inside the body. This star is the tracks of alpha emissions from a tiny speck of plutonium in the lung tissue of an ape. And that happens over 48 hours, those tracks. So when uranium-238 is mined, you only take away the uranium, you leave all the other materials behind, and 85%, as I said before, is left in the uranium tailings. Here's a wall of uranium tailings, 30 feet high at Elliott Lake. There's about 70 million tons of radioactive sand behind that wall. containing all of those byproducts of uranium. In the voluminous uranium tailings, thorium-230, which has a half-life of 76,000 years, that's one of the byproducts, reproduces the radium, radon, and polonium for hundreds of thousands of years. So this becomes a perennial, an eternal problem for the environment. The uranium mill tailings hazards are multiple.
So
There's
you
the
can
gas
pause
that's
it there,
given
Lloyd,
off,
because he
there's
gets
the seepage
really
into the
sciencey.
groundwater, there's the
Yeah, and so the other presenter there was Lorraine Reckmans, who is an Indigenous woman from that area, from Elliott Lake, from the same place as Joan. They are Mississauga First Nation, which, as I was saying, is part of that Ojibwe, Odawa, Potawatomi, Anishinaabe Nation. And she was also the president of the Green Party of Canada, the first Indigenous woman to be the president of a major political party. So we're just going to hear from Lorraine for a little bit. If you could actually fast forward to minute 25. I think we're running out of time, and I want to get to the other two recordings. So we'll just skip
dust
Lorraine's
blowing through the
introduction
air.
and go to minute
And so
25.
Oh, are we talking about the next one or this video?
This video, the same video, Lorraine was presenting at the same Raven Network presentation.
Okay.
And so
25,
Lorraine,
you said?
yep, minute 25, I think. So Lorraine's dad was a miner in Elliott Lake, and was very, very sick, like a lot of miners. Go ahead.
Okay.
Now the home of my grandchildren. So miigwech for being here. So I have a long history, I think, going back to the late 1980s and dealing with the subject of uranium mining. My father worked at Denison Mines at Elliott Lake, and my mother was from the Serpent River First Nation. And because of the Indian Act, we were not allowed to live on the reserve because my father was a Frenchman. So when Indigenous women married outside of the...
Sorry about that. Technical difficulties here. I'm not sure what's going on. Trying to get my system back in order.
Good morning.
What minute are we at? Something's going on here. Sorry about this.
And all the little groups in it. It's on the order of that number, and there's no...
Ay, ay, ay. Was this the right video? Or are we on the wrong one? Sarah? You're muted. I can't hear you.
Yeah, no, that's not the right video. You know what?
I'm not sure what happened there.
Yeah, I think I might just have, go ahead. Let's skip to minute 27 in Lorraine's presentation.
Is this the one?
Back there.
Let me know, is this the one?
No, that's the intervention that Joan and I did with the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. So it's the one that says Dr. Gordon Edwards, because Lorraine was in the same presentation with the Raven Institute. And I think we'll just maybe fast forward to minute 27.
Right.
The whole presentation is so good. I hate to edit any of it out, but I do feel like you're listening.
Imagine if man.
There you go. That's the one.
Okay.
The whole
That
presentation
was very
is
strange. I don't know why. I'm not sure why my window actually closed. It just sort of disappeared. What minute are we at?
Let's go to minute 27. I hate to cut off Lorraine's self-introduction there, but there you go. That should be good.
treaty area, which spans from Sault Ste. Marie to Penetanguishing and north to the height of land where the water begins to flow the other way. So it's I think, an assault on that relationship. What happened at like the destroying of 10 lakes, dumping of nuclear waste, effluent discharge into the Serpent River watershed, and destruction of the traditional territory. It's something that I always say when I speak, that is something that was never factored into the cost of uranium. We were told, that nuclear energy was going to be too cheap to meter, that it would just be such a benefit to society, but the cost was completely subsidized. So this, I think the whole industry was, there was industrial maneuvering and political posturing and collaboration across industry and government. It was carefully coordinated collusions. But so you could see, there were political reasons for keeping the mines open in Elliott Lake, even in the 1960s when the price of uranium dropped out. They were mining to stockpile. It's a long story. It goes back to 1955. But the short of it is that 10 lakes were destroyed in the production of nuclear waste. And I get chills when I listen to Gordon talk, about the decay chain, because what we're looking at is millions of tons of radioactive waste that have been left behind from decades of mining. I'll start off where I engaged fully was in the decommissioning process. So this was the first
cut it
time
off there.
in the history of
really
Canada
wanted
that
to highlight.
uranium mines were being decommissioned.
Yeah, Lorraine goes into really awesome detail about her journey with that community. She started out as a journalist and really exposed for, and her book, This Is My Homeland, is internationally renowned. And so that is really worth highlighting. So how are we doing for time? Are there any questions before I keep going? I just have 2 more clips that I'd like to share with you.
Go ahead. We're all watching.
Okay. So the last 2 clips, Lloyd, are from the last 2 clips. The next one is, if you don't mind calling it up, the next one is, we're going to be talking about the uranium fuel chain at its next, at its end. So we talked a lot about the uranium fuel chain at the beginning, and now we're talking about the uranium fuel chain at the end. So Chief Dan Michano is a chief from a, I think it's called Bistabatong, and it is also, its English name is Ignace, and that is in Northern Ontario. And so the problem is that we don't have a solution. There is no solution on this planet for nuclear waste. They pretend that they are going to dig giant holes and put it in the ground, but they've had more than 60 years now to get started on that, and they still haven't, because that they know that the science is unsound and dangerous. So they are called deep geological repositories. They are dumps. Once the nuclear waste goes in, there is no way to retrieve it. They admit that the casks that the nuclear waste is held in will crack, will leak, and that the mine or wherever the dump will fail. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So Chief Dan Michano is an Anishinaabe chief, and his words are really, really powerful. And so this was, the government every once in a while has committees, and they were talking about the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, which is a conglomeration of industry, of for-profit industries that have been given free license by the so-called Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission to decide for themselves with very little oversight on what to do with nuclear waste. And so the government was having a committee to listen to some citizens giving their opinion on this framework whereby industry gets to decide for themselves what to do with waste. And Chief Dan Michano there's 2 locations set for this deep geological repository, one just close to really, really close to the largest North American nuclear power station in Bruce County. I can show you on the map where that is. And Chief Machano is from Ignace. So I'll just show you on the map really, really quickly where these two locations are. I will share my screen.
Just to give you a little bit of a heads up there, Sarah.
Yep.
The link that you provided in your presentation goes to a repository from Carl View.
Yeah.
The event has been deleted.
Oh no.
So we
they
are
took
seeing
it
in real
down.
time possible cover up on this information.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, no, that event should not be taken down. So if you click on the link, nothing happens?
It does open the screen and then it says no event. Select meeting has been deleted already.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, that's so frustrating. Oh no. Wow. Okay, so I'll show you where we're looking at. So so Bruce Nuclear is on the Bruce Peninsula. And it's right here. So this is the largest North American nuclear power station. And Tiverton is just inland a little bit, and that's where they're planning a deep geological repository, a place to permanently store this radioactive waste, right on the shores of beautiful Lake Huron. And the people there are saying no. Of course they're saying no. And the other location that they're hoping for, and we're talking about tens, potentially hundreds of trucks taking high-level nuclear waste every day on the highways, all the way up from the GTA area, because of course there's three major plants. There's Darlington, Pickering, and Bruce, bringing over time millions of casks of highly radioactive nuclear waste to this place, Ignace. It's right around here somewhere.
So is this also the same lake? Huron?
We're at the top of Lake Superior now.
Okay, Lake
I'm
Superior.
having trouble finding Ignace. It's just a tiny little blip on the ground. Anyway, and so oh, here we go, Ignace, yeah. So somewhere around here is the plan for a deep geological repository. And of course, the communities there are saying no.
On the island itself? You're talking about an island?
No, just somewhere in the North Shore there. I don't actually know the exact location, but I know that Chief Dan Machano was at that commission, and it's brilliant. It's a brilliant clip because he's basically being hounded by members of parliament. Well, if you don't want the waste, what do you think we should do with it? And he repeatedly says, in a very honorable, calm way, stop making it, and then we'll talk. So Indigenous nations have been calling for a moratorium on small modular nuclear reactors. In 2018, the Assembly of First Nations called for a moratorium on small modular nuclear reactors. The Anishinaabe Nation and the Iroquois Caucus in 2017 made a really brilliant 5-point plan on what to do with nuclear waste, get it away from the waterways, put it in the best casks that you can, that science will give us. Don't make it irretrievable deep in the ground. Make it so that we can put it in better casks as the technology develops, and make it so that if something goes wrong, we can do our best to try to fix it. And that's called a management system. So, so I'm just going to try to wrap up talking a little bit about small modular nuclear reactors. So this technology is really, really dangerous because, again, it's opening up that Pandora's box of reprocessing. So I'm just going to show you the companies that are at work in Canada. So one of the designs, they're called micro reactors that are going to be, sorry, wrong one.
You're going to be sharing your screen as well?
Yeah, let me share my screen. Sorry, I thought I was. Okay. So you guys can see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, so BWXT is the United States' largest nuclear weapons producer. They also create nuclear submarines. They have a location in Peterborough where they take the refined and then processed uranium from Cameco and they put it in our fuel rods. And a few years ago, they were given a 10-year license. So the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission used to provide citizens with the opportunity every 4 years to do interventions like the one Joan and I did, so that there was community, at least a little bit of community feedback and awareness and transparency around the nuclear industry. And the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission just arbitrarily changed the licensing period from 4 years to 10 years. And then they gave this company that had been making the fuel rods for our CANDU reactors, they gave them blind license to do whatever they want in the middle of a downtown Peterborough neighborhood. It's surrounded by homes, this factory. It is got terrible legacies already from the GE Hitachi years. It is older than World War II, this factory. And we don't know what they're doing, but we do know that BWXT technology with the US Department of Defense through a kind of secretive project called Project Peely, has been working on bringing their nuclear submarine technology to the surface, creating something called microreactors that have already been pre-approved by Justin Trudeau's Liberal government and provincial governments to pepper our north. And this is the technology that will be sold to middle and small nations around the world. And that material in those reactors, they call it pelletized, and it does contain, they all contain very dangerous nuclear materials. And as we've seen with the Putin's Russia invasion of Ukraine, that and Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, that any nuclear power plant can be turned into a staging ground for militaries, paramilitaries, terrorist organizations, because it therefore becomes impregnable. You can't attack a nuclear power installation. So any troops that are staged out of a nuclear power installation are untouchable. So that's BWXT, and they are, like I said, one of the technologies that's already pre-approved for Canadian soil comes from BWXT. Rolls-Royce is the company funding another company called Moltex. They create the United Kingdom's nuclear fleet and nuclear weapons. And so Moltex is on the Bay of Fundy, and I'll just really quickly show you where this location is. This is the 4th nuclear reactor in Canada. There's 3 nuclear reactors in Ontario, and there's 1 in New Brunswick on the beautiful Bay of Fundy called Point Lepreau. And it is an aging nuclear reactor that desperately needs to get shut down. And they have already pre-approved not 1, but 2 nuclear experiments. And I'm going to end my presentation here because the Moltex design is a reprocessing technology. And it is talking about taking that used CANDU fuel, which is solid, reprocessing it for plutonium extraction, use and burning it extra hot in a small modular nuclear reactor, and then selling that, using Canada as the guinea pig, and then selling that design to small and middle nations around the world, which means putting plutonium in the hands of countries around the world. It means Canada being the location of the start of a new nuclear arms race around the world. And so another company that we should be very, very aware of is Westinghouse. They have just received basically $975 million, almost $1 billion in funding from the Canadian taxpayer to work on an experiment at Darlington on the shores of Lake Ontario. This company went bankrupt in the United States over an experiment that they were trying to build in South Carolina to the tune of billions of dollars. Another company is Terrestrial that has received $25 million from the Liberal government. On their board of directors is Stephen Harper. And that's important because this all started back in 2015 when Stephen Harper gave control of Canada's nuclear programs. It used to be under Crown control or government control, and he gave control of it under a GoCo model to none other than SNC Lavalin. And SNC Lavalin is operating at Chalk River location. I'm just going to share my screen one last time. This is actually where I'll end off. Not with Moltex, but with Chalk River and SNC Lavalin. So this location back to Ottawa. So the Ottawa River watershed, really the headwaters is at a place called Chalk River. And so in 2015, Stephen Harper broke up that Crown Corporation called AECL, Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, and gave it to SNC Lavalin and their partners that today they call themselves the Canadian National Energy Alliance, but really it is SNC Lavalin and their partners Jacobs and Fluor, which are also nuclear weapons producers. And there is a terrible nuclear waste legacy at this site, and yet they are being approved to go ahead with next generation reprocessing nuclear technology. And people in the Ottawa River watershed do not know that there is tritium and strontium-90 in their water. The city of Ottawa has tried to get more information on that and are shut down. There's so much more to share. I wish I could go on. I could go on for a long time, but I am calling for a complete moratorium on small modular nuclear reactors and an investigation into the true independence of the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, because I believe that it is corporate captured. That's it.
So thank you very much, Sarah. I did want to have this presentation today because we are in the process, of course, through our UnityNet International network, the Global Unity Network, to engage with communities, in particular Indigenous communities from around the world, starting in Africa. They need to understand what are the cautionary tales that are coming from the Indigenous people of Canada. And especially if they get approached by these corporations that have these so-called solutions that are these technologies such as SMRs, these small modular reactors. And the legacy that we have here in Canada is a telling story and a cautionary tale. They absolutely need to be aware of this information. I'm so glad that we do have at least Gabriella and Juliet. So Gabriella is in Uganda, Juliet is in South Africa. Of course, Andrew is in the United States, but is a member of the African diaspora. And so we are engaging with the African diaspora worldwide in our efforts to bring this information to the African diaspora and to the people of the Indigenous communities of the world. So our process here is to connect the Indigenous communities of Turtle Island, which we consider to be all of the Americas, North and South, plus the Caribbean, through our crossroads in the Caribbean, which is also on the island of Bermuda, and use that as the crossroads of the Atlantic, and have these dialogues across the ocean with the Indigenous communities of Africa as a starting point to connect with all Indigenous communities of the world, so they are aware of this type of information, so so they know not to go down the roads we've gone down. And this is the cautionary tale we're trying to tell through our programs that we have here, where we're building this network around the world through social media at this point in time, but trying to make sure that this information hopefully is never erased from our memory, as has seemed to be happened on this government website that you just gave us a link to, which is a very another cautionary tale right there, is that it's so easy to just remove information. But if we can disseminate it all over the web on these public social media, perhaps we'll have enough people see it. So again, any more comments from other people? I see, for instance, Lisa Anise, you are unmuted. I'm not sure if you wanted to say a few words. So Lisa Anise is our colleague in California.
Yes.
So maybe she could introduce herself as well.
All right. My name is Lisa Anise, and I'm a member of the International Dance Council Division of UNESCO. I've also been working on this project by interviewing or acting as the key for nonprofits and NGOs in the interiors of Africa, Asia, well, basically everywhere. At the same time, we're organizing hip hop culture and working for cultural education in the schools and universities, something I want to be able to talk about with the Global Sister Schools project tomorrow, if we can get that done. But I just wanted to let you know I was really pleased with the amount of sheer information that you had, Sarah. Very nicely done, well presented, in spite of the occasional little, well, the stuff we all go through, the silly business. After a while, even when it's bad, we all get old hat at sidestepping and coming up with other streams of information. So nicely done. I just wanted to let you know that. And
thank you, Lisa. I look forward to learning more about your organization.
oh, you will, believe me, you will.
I'm a teacher as well.
So as we build this network, of course, what we are trying to do is connect the educators, very much so that we can build what we call these Unity Garden Learning Centers. So which would be independently run by what we call the Interfaith Neighborhood Academic and Business Collaboratives, which is a business model of community partnerships. So we have this community partnership template, the matrix partnership template. Actually, it has 8 sectors of partnership: public, private, civil society, academic, interfaith, and through the arts, but as well with the Indigenous community as the 8th partnership that we'd like to bring into that partnership template to create these cooperative organizations in the local communities that would basically run these Unity Garden Learning Centers, where we can bring this knowledge, especially to the youth in all our local communities, and connect all of those community Unity learning gardens together through a metaverse platform, actually, that already exists. We have one already in our pipeline, developed in California, that we're hoping that we can work with Andrew and his network, which is the Ad Hoc International Advisory Board of Goodwill Ambassadors and Activists, which I am representative for Canada, the Francophonie, which is the 88 countries of the French-speaking world, plus the Commonwealth of Nations, the 55 or 54 countries of the Commonwealth, plus Turtle Island, which again, as I said, is all of North America, including the Caribbean and South America by treaty. So we are again attempting to connect the Americas with Africa, with Eurasia as well, and all of the indigenous peoples who we are hoping will lead the way toward what we call a localized, productive, compassionate, collaborative, regenerative economy that leaves no one behind. So those are words that I have repeated many times. Of course, we have these programs every week. So we are trying to really hammer forward toward what we call a post-2030 paradigm. So as we approach the end of the Sustainable Development Goals, we hope that the US or the UN will adopt this new concept of a regenerative economy and a set of regenerative development goals, so we can build a future regenerative economy that doesn't have these terrible legacies of waste and exploitation of our natural world and our peoples, of which we are part, as noted at the beginning.
Wonderful.
I wanted to say hello and thank you, Sarah, as a fellow Canadian. And I love Canada and its beauty, but it you know, there's a lot of parts that are really not beautiful, like really horrific. And I am with Lloyd on UnityNet International. And my angle is in education and learning. I'm finishing my doctorate at the University of Toronto, OISE, in the Department of Curriculum, Teaching and Learning. And I'm all about social emotional well-being and being labeled. But so much more. I'm also co-founder of Maui Aloha Project Global Eco Village Initiative, which is it's all about co-creating regenerative communities that are all about not only housing and food security from seed to table, but being regenerative and having a zero carbon imprint. Yeah, and trying to be as off-grid as possible, you know, and, you know, with whatever, you know, ceremony and honoring multiliteracies and all cultures and all identities and just kind of communal, coming back to the community, all of our relations and not being so isolated, you know, all that kind of thing. And so, you know, with the very core of what you're talking about, we're, you know, very core of what I'm talking about in all realms that I've dealt with has to do with peace and love and well-being. And this is not about that.
Yeah, and respecting, you know, that the way we started off with Lloyd's introduction and what you had just said, all of my relations, is a saying that I've heard many times from Indigenous elders. I work mostly with Ojibwe elders, and that saying is recognizing all of my relations, that plants and animals, that those people are, that they are our older brothers and sisters. They came before us, and the animals and the plants, the fish, all the organisms, they all came before us. They're our older brothers and sisters.
Yes.
And there is all of our relations is our ancestors, but also those future generations to come. And all of my relations includes the spirit realm. That we need to keep all of this in our thinking when we make plans. And the precautionary principle is embedded in ecological wisdom, and that is a big part of the Green Party. So I'm very political, and all of the things that you folks are talking about is something that the Greens embed, and that I'm trying to improve the way that we embed that into our political systems as well.
See, I'm wearing green, and so are you. As it happens. Yeah. I mean, the most important thing, and I have a background in play, a degree in play and community relations, because I chose that because it came to me all my life. I was very, you know, to have a community around me and to learn by example and experience. And I really believe, you know, right now, especially with the mental health issues, we have a youth mental health crisis globally, but Canada gets to boost that we have the third highest youth mental health representation. And a large part is to do from our Indigenous populations, but not only, it goes into every sector, every race, color, religion, socioeconomic, all of that. So I believe that we must listen to all indigenous ways of knowing, because all of their systems, especially all of my relation systems relating to Mother Earth and the land being outside, you were taught by your multi-literacies, by your strengths, in a strengths-based system, not a deficit-based system. And you had all of the people around you in your village, elders, youngsters, all ages. You weren't segregated. You didn't sit all day indoors breathing artificial air and not seeing natural light. So there's so much to be learned. But Sarah, I'd love to continue the conversation, and thank you for your important work and also for your strength in being in politics and your wisdom, and to put a very interesting and vital story together in such a succinct way. And I wish you much success in your storytelling, and especially in this digital world. There are some pluses to this digital world, and this is one of them. So nice to meet you.
Thank you, Stephanie. And yeah, I agree. I'm an educator, and this generation is experiencing climate anxiety because they have been told since kindergarten, you know, on Earth Day, the first movie that they see is The Lorax, and they watch that through primary school. And then about grade 4, they start to get direct learning because Ontario educators want them to know the truth of what's going on. And so Canadian millennials are deeply educated, more than most adults, on the realities of the climate crisis. And unfortunately, you're right that they're not given those opportunities to interface with nature. And nature is the place where we heal spiritually and emotionally, and Mother Nature is the best teacher. And so outdoor education and allowing us to experience those other aspects of the human, not just our brains. We're not just brains on stilts. There's far more to the human experience than that. And yeah, outdoor education is a huge aspect of my teaching learning practice. And I think it needs to be brought in right across the board globally.
And this is actually the concept around the Unity Gardens. As setting these up as classrooms, they are actually gardens. They're intended to be gardens. So actually learning in the context of nature. So we have 5 different, and I'm gonna turn on my video again here so that people can see me as I talk. But the idea is we have actually 5 different configurations of Unity Gardens that we've been talking about. So I was actually introduced to Sarah through Joan Kerr. So Joan Kerr is developing her CSV garden, the Climate Smart Victory Garden, and that was the model of teaching people about entrepreneurship in the context of a garden. So we did that, and we extended it to become the Unity Gardens. And the system of education we'd like to do in the context of a garden, but we call it a Climate Smart Victory Garden. So she's now extending that to create the CSV gardens, which are one kind of Unity garden in an actual garden, in the sense that we now also are promoting what we call food forests, or 3D polyculture landscapes, permaculture, essentially. As another type of garden that we can build in any community, anywhere on Earth. So these are intended to be universal. They are intended to be open source, so not patentable. So gardens and forests, and we have a model for what we call the Climate Smart Kitchen as a learning kitchen in the community. So as another type of Unity garden is actually a kitchen. We're hoping that they will be beautifully ornamented with plants, and they'll actually be growing the food right in where people are being served. And then, of course, we also have something called the Wheel of Life Farms, which was developed by a gentleman from the United States, but he lives in Vietnam. So he developed this model for a regenerative farming system. It's actually an aquaponic system that incorporates animals, so chickens, pigs, goats, cows, all into this regenerative system that actually also grows fish, and we'll be able to feed communities quite sufficiently, self-sufficient as well. So it's never been built before, as far as I know. It's all been modeled on paper, even all the way down to the amount of income that can be produced by a community. But we are hoping one day to be able to demonstrate those solutions. And then the final solution we call the solar roof building, or the pod buildings, which are actually controlled environment, net negative energy systems that these pod buildings can actually produce net negative or net energy and net clean water, and do it at essentially zero external energy input. So we have these being demonstrated now out in Alberta with a team that's out there. There's actually a global network, this PodNet Co-op, which is actually, I believe, registered in Iceland, but it is a Canadian technology that was originally developed in Montreal, that we are hoping to as well demonstrate, especially in the northern communities of the Indigenous, with the Indigenous peoples of Canada, where these controlled environment gardens can produce food, can produce water, can produce energy, net positive buildings that we're hoping that will be something that Indigenous communities can use around the world. Well, not just Indigenous communities, all communities, especially as we approach this era of climate change, where we're going to begin experiencing some extremes, as we already see in terms of the storms, in terms of the droughts, in terms of extreme weather events, in terms of temperature. These become shelters for community members actually to escape the extreme heat waves, because they are self-cooling as well. And so these are solutions that are all, again, in the open source. In other words, they can be shared, they can be improved, just like open source software, where people can, as long as they acknowledge the original developer of the original software, they can now go ahead and change it, improve it, and so it allows this this ability for communities to gradually improve and share those improvements among themselves. And so this is called open source hardware. So it allows us to then move forward into a realm beyond just the software, into the hardware realm of sharing.
Anything open source is totally cool. I'd like to thank all of you so much, and this is a wonderful opportunity for me. It's the first time I've ever done my own presentation on what I know about the new nuclear industry. I have a podcast. It's called Radioactive, in all caps. It's on anchor.fm. It's also on Spotify and Google Podcasts. So if you just Google my name and Radioactive in all caps, I've got about 12 episodes where I interview Canadians living in these radioactive neighborhoods. And unfortunately, I didn't get to my last Indigenous clip that was going to be from with an interview with Spazkazizm, which is the Woolastoqey traditional name of Ron Tremblay, a Woolastoqey traditional Grand Chief. Yeah, in all caps for Radioactive. Yeah.
Okay.
And
well,
so
if you could put the link in the chat for us, then we have a record of that.
Sure,
and
sure.
If you'd like, you can actually continue to play the videos, whatever you'd like.
I have to get going. I'm so sorry. I'm on
even once you're gone, we can still play the videos for ourselves.
Sure.
Thank you,
I'll
Sarah.
send that. Okay.
Thank you.
I'll put that in the link and I'll head out.
And for those on the call, there's 3 little dots at the bottom of the Zoom window, chat window, where you can actually save the chat for yourself. And if you want to watch those videos, I did put the links in the chat. Again, I will try to produce a document from these presentations that we do, these videos, these recordings, so that when people rewatch them, they'll have those links and be able to get to the network that we have, as well as the resources that are available for people to understand better what are those specific details that they need to understand regarding all of these critical issues. So do we want to continue today, or would we wish to finish our ITU Summit for this Thursday? Any feedback from anybody?
I have a class to get ready for, so I would be leaving early anyhow.
Mhm. Okay, so thank you. I think there's only
Thanks,
a few
Lloyd.
people. I have no other additional things on my presentation, so it would be the same as last week. But I am also seeing Gabriela. You want to say a few words?
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor, for the great evening and for the presenter, Gabriela. Gabriel was been on call. My question was, will she be given another chance again to help us understand deeper what she was discussing today? I tried so hard to follow up the discussion for my co-leader, Madam Sarah Gabriela, but along the way, I think I lost track. And then my another question was also what she was presenting and what she's doing, and how can it be of help or impact to African communities? I don't know whether I'm overthinking. Is it only for the Canadian or for the other side? And what about for us in Africa? Thank you so much, Professor.
So I can answer that in some ways. So you did ask, will she be given another chance to present what she has? And yes, I would hope so. It would be ideally not just her. What we would like to do is work with her closely and get those Indigenous voices, especially of the various Indigenous grandmothers that she's working with here on Turtle Island, North America. But the cautionary tale is what we are trying to basically convey here. So the cautionary tale for the African context is the likelihood that local communities across Africa will be approached by this industry, this nuclear industry, and touting their so-called solutions for energy through these small nuclear reactors, modular SMRs as they're called, are basically the technologies that are being used by nuclear submarines. So this was a Cold War era technology that was developed in order to produce very silent submarine technologies. They don't have diesel or anything like that, of course, that would be very noisy. So they created these nuclear submarines, these technologies that run off of nuclear energy. But it's not the nuclear energy itself that is as much of the issue. It is this reprocessing. It is the waste from doing that. And as well, through certain types of these nuclear reactors, these small nuclear reactors that will be pushed around the world by these industries. Many of them actually produce weapons grade materials that can be used to create atomic bombs. And so these, if these small reactors are disseminated all over the world, all over Africa, all over Asia, the chances of these materials falling into the wrong hands becomes ever more greater. So these are very, very dangerous solutions, technologies to be very mindful of. And Canada is at the very heart of this, along with the United States, England, and other of these superpowers, the so-called.
Such as Japan, because I'm sharing my screen now. It was just recently announced 2 weeks ago that the United States and Japan are announcing a partnership with Ghana to support that country being the mover in Africa for this very technology. So yes, Malaysia, it is a very relevant issue for Africa and Africans.
Yeah, so this is, if you could share that link as well, Andrew, to see that information, so we again have that web page, that announcement, because this is the future of our children that we are really determining here in our decisions made today on how we develop into the future. So I came into this whole conversation being somebody that traveled in Asia quite a bit, and I had experienced the development spurt that happened in China in my dealings there. Wasn't as much of an issue I think in places like Taiwan, but actually in mainland China. The amount of pollution, destruction of the landscapes, and it was just, it broke my heart to see. And I think we can allow that to happen as well in so many other places, especially here in North America, and also in places in Africa, I think, are of course being devastated by these industrial technology solutions and the colonial systems that impose them. So we would like to have these conversations and make sure that they are in the ears of those people who can defend the land and are able to be the voice of Mother Earth and the voice of their communities as well.
I would have
So
to
thank
say
you all.
this is not an issue for future generations. This is an issue for us right this second. So I think it's very relevant and timely to have this discussion, because Japan is now following through on its earlier announcement that it's planned to dump into the ocean over 1 million tons of radioactivity as a result of their recent unfortunate disaster there. So this issue of nuclear waste is relevant right now to everyone.
Mm-hmm. And I actually, my own history is direct with that nuclear disaster that happened in Fukushima. I actually ended up in Japan just in the weeks following the tsunami. I didn't go to Fukushima itself because obviously it was a disaster zone, but I did go to Yokohama for some events for fundraising with some groups there that were trying to help people that were severely affected by that disaster. And so I do have some connection in that way, although it is many, many years old. And I was involved in a lot of these discussions around what do we do with that waste? What do we do with the fact that all of this groundwater actually was flowing through the basement of that Fukushima nuclear reactor and into the ocean? And this is already an issue even just weeks after that disaster, where they knew this was happening already. And the ocean was being contaminated with radionuclides. And so this is an ongoing thread of conversations that we are now going back full circle, I feel. Even after all this time, we still have some serious decisions that need to be made about what are we going to do with all of this. Dumping in the ocean, I don't think is one of those solutions. Then there are technical things that a lot of us don't really get involved in. We are here to educate people about what are the issues, hopefully come up with some solutions the local communities can use that are not these destructive solutions that are going to be pushed and are continuously pushed by those corporations that are seeing bottom line as their #1 priority. So thank you all for attending this 75th week of the IGU Summit, the Indigenous Global Unity Summit event. I think we'll wrap up today. It is 12:40. And we will get back into doing a presentation as I usually do next week. We will as well have our Drawdown Markham monthly event next Tuesday as well.
Thanks, Lloyd. Thanks, Lloyd. I have to go.
All right. So thank you very much, Stephanie, Andrew, Gabriela, and Juliet staying on the line with us for our entire presentation.
Okay, good luck. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good night.
Thank you. Very interesting. I need to go into the links and learn more. Thank you so much.
Say
Thank
the
you.
chat. I'm about to close down.
All right.
Now's the time.
Okay, let me take it down the chat. Thank you.
And Lloyd, in the meantime, though, I'm going to go back here to the slide because it does show that this was in 2021 that Japan announces it will dump contaminated water into the sea. But on the link in the chat, you will find an explainer for everything you want to know about the water release. That's also available from The Guardian. I'll put that in the chat as well.
Thank you so much.
Madam Malaka, please save the chat for me. My screen is giving me a problem, and you can share it for me later.
I'll also try to send the chat to Lloyd.
All right. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
I'll also send the chat to Lloyd so he can share it with our team when he gets ready.
All right. Okay. No, that'd be great. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Good day.